weeks ago, I attended an event with my husband where the goal was to slip in unnoticed and enjoy some good snacks. Imagine my surprise when I was approached by the organizer of the event. He made it clear that he knew who I was, where I lived, and what I did for a living. But when he volunteered my position, he incorrectly assumed that I was the boss's assistant. I corrected him and told him that I was instead the CFO of the company. He apologized for his blunder and seemed embarrassed by his mistake. I was not offended nor upset, but this was not the first time, nor do I believe it will be the last time. Why is there this stigma that women in the workplace must be secretaries or assistants, teachers or nurses? While those are very admirable careers, we are also heads of marketing, directors of HR, CFOs, and business owners. We control companies and checkbooks, make impactful decisions, and effectuate change. Recently, I was sitting around with a group of friends on vacation, and one of my friends recounted with horror as she realized that her pilot was a female. She had said she turned to her husband and pleaded with him to get off of the plane and change flights. I listened to this story with disbelief, how a female could feel this way towards another female. What about girl power? I couldn't understand her way of thinking. Then I took a step back, and I realized that we came from very different homes. She was raised with a very traditional and culturally different family than I was. I was raised by American parents and grandparents in the 80s and 90s. I was taught to believe that a woman can do almost anything a man can do. This woman was the youngest in her family to much older immigrant parents and was raised to believe that women could only be homemakers. While she feared for her life in the hands of this pilot, I was thinking how amazingly talented this woman must be to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Professionals such as construction workers, auto mechanics, engineers, and even scientists were traditionally male-dominated. Women are beginning to navigate into these fields. It is no longer shocking to see a woman wearing a hard hat on a construction site or see a female firefighter fighting a fire, or even having a woman change her oil. As we venture into many other vocations and careers, the stigmas continue to follow us in the form of wage gap. The wage gap indicates that on average, a woman makes 83 cents to the dollar that her male counterparts are making for the same work. In 1963, a woman made 59 cents for each dollar earned by a male. While we are headed in the right direction, we aren't as far along as we would like to be. Initially, the wage gap was meant to be closed in the year 2059, but by the current rate, UN.org says it will take 257 years to close. We just celebrated Equal Pay Day on March 14th. This date symbolizes how far into the new year a woman must work to equal the same amount of pay that her male counterpart made the year before. When I started my career in the Big Five accounting firm in the late 90s, there were a ton of educational and strong emphasis on policies and procedures intended to keep women safe in the workplace. Flexible schedules were encouraged to help working moms feel the balance between work and her family. People were encouraged to watch what they say and taught how to say it. While much progress has been made at an institutional level, the humans that run them continue to perpetuate these stigmas. Many years ago, my boss came to me and let me know that he had to give a very large bonus to the boys. He actually said the boys. Not because he felt they were more qualified or more precious to him, but rather because he felt that they wouldn't stick around if he didn't provide them with strong financial incentives. This theme came up a few years ago in a different office when a couple of women in my office asked for moderate increases to their salaries, and a male counterpart asked for a significant raise. The male was granted his entire request, yet the female's requests were cut in half. When my boss had to come tell me about these increases, he was embarrassed. It wasn't that he valued his employees less, but he was looking to what he felt would keep the employees happy enough to stay, and he viewed the men as needing more than their female counterparts. Why is this still a thing? Clearly he knew this wasn't right, or he wouldn't have come to me so embarrassed. How could I express to him without making him feel worse that this is not okay? How could I get him to see the unfairness of the decision? Although his mind was set in this particular situation, I continued to work with him to help him understand that he needed to value his female employees, and although they would most likely continue to be loyal to him, he needed to ensure a healthy work environment for all employees. Over the course of my career, I found that there was no one-size-fits-all. People were coming from different places and times. This particular individual was born at a time where the sole breadwinners were men, and he had a hard time understanding that that has changed. In my current HR capacity, I've been lucky to be able to choose staff of highly qualified individuals. That requires that I look past gender, race, or any other biases. I prefer to look at education, experience, and most importantly, personality and how they will relate to their peers. There are times where I've met with opposition, but overall, ultimately, my coworkers are starting to trust me, and they allow me to do as I need to do. One of the biggest stigmas that women often feel is that they have to contend with is the choice between being a career woman and being a mother. While I first told my boss I was pregnant with my second child, he expressed his concern that I was going to choose motherhood over my job. When I came back a few weeks later and informed him that I was also pregnant with my third child, turns out I was pregnant with twins, he expressed even more concern, and he said, for sure you're not going to stay, or for sure you're going to stay home with your children. I tried to assure him over and over again that I was going to stay and that I was committed to my career. He incentivized me to stay by offering me Fridays off so I could do carpool, cook for Shabbos, and have a little more time for my family. I was lucky to have bosses that supported me and enabled me to find a balance. I found through my career that support comes from interesting places and opposition comes from interesting places. When I started off my career as an auditor at a Big Five accounting firm, I worked for you got to go onto different jobs and you had different managers, and sometimes you were lucky enough or unlucky enough to end up with the same manager more than once. I was very lucky to have a really wonderful man who was black and not Jewish, and he would look at his watch on Friday and say, Jennifer, don't you have to go home and get ready for Shabbos? And I would take extra work with me because I didn't want my non-Jewish coworkers to feel like I was getting away with something. I would take it home with me to do on Saturday night or Sunday. And he didn't really care about the time, he cared about the product. Alternatively, I had a frum Jewish woman that I worked for that would shame anyone who tried to get home anytime before the 18 minutes. Throughout my career, I have managed to meet every deadline and hand in every deliverable, and still show up to my kids' chumash play or leave a little early to make it to their hockey games. While I remained involved in my kids' school throughout by being on the board, and the meetings were in the evenings, and decorating Siddurim for my entire grade in my free time, my kids would express their disappointment that I wasn't there to serve hot dogs during the day on Lag BaOmer. My aforementioned child helped me with the slideshow, and he has confirmed that he eventually learned that working isn't easy and that he is proud of my career. Despite the many strides that we have made, only 8.8% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, and only 18% of Congress are females. No piece of legislation or mandatory sexual harassment training or quota is going to get rid of an unconscious level of thinking. Political correctness, while well-intentioned, perhaps stifles our ability to express and understand others' viewpoints. Susan Fleming, in her talk about what we can do to reduce gender bias and why you should, speaks about creating an environment where people are allowed to say the wrong thing as long as it is said in an effort to understand and experience the perspectives of someone else different than them. This also requires that the other side to be open to these conversations in a non-judgmental way and to be aware of your own biases. Through dialogue and education, we can work on changing these underlying biases. If we can get to the core of the issue and change the way people view one another, there will no longer be a need for political correctness because they will have confronted and overcome their own biases. We need to start talking openly and honestly. We need to stand up for each other when we see something wrong. As the saying on the New York subway indicates, if you see something, say something. When we allow ourselves to understand that we are all a little or a lot biased too, we can transform the conversations from one of blame and shame to one of committed action.